In Monster Hunter Wilds, sharpness is one of the most basic mechanics that directly influences our damage output, combat effectiveness, and overall hunting efficiency. It's a bit counterintuitive to know that even blunt weapons such as a hammer also need to be sharpened. But in this game, weapon sharpness is incredibly important for any melee weapon players. So in this video, I want to cover the detailed mechanics of weapon sharpness, how it works in damage calculations, and what specific skills we can leverage to maximize sharpness potential. But first, let's get through some basics. Every melee weapon has a sharpness gauge represented by various colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, white, and purple. The higher the sharpness level, the greater your damage output, with purple and white sharpness dealing significantly higher damage and more likely to avoid attacks bouncing off tough monster hides. However, the highest sharpness we can get in low rank and high rank is white sharpness. Purple sharpness will only become available from master rank. Sharpness impacts two damage aspects: raw damage modifier and elemental damage modifier. The modifiers are multipliers applied to a weapon's raw and elemental damage based on its current sharpness level. Higher sharpness levels enhance damage, while lower levels diminish it. For instance, when our weapon is at green sharpness, we will deal 100% of the weapon's base raw damage. When sharpness is dropped to red, we will only deal 50% of base raw damage. On the other hand, if we have blue sharpness, we will get 20% more raw damage bonus. And it works very similarly for elemental portion of our weapon damage. But the modifier number is different from raw attack. With white sharpness, for example, we will get a 15% boost on the base elemental attack shown on the weapon. Now let's clarify it with a quick example. Suppose your weapon has 200 raw attacks. At green sharpness with 1.05 multiplier, the effective raw attack becomes 210. Now increase that to white sharpness with 1.32 multiplier, and our weapon's raw becomes 264, a significant jump in damage output. The calculator for elemental damage is very similar but has some nuance in it. Now I have another video that explains in detail how elemental damage works in the game, so if you are interested in learning more about elemental weapons and skills, be sure to check it out. The sharpness gauge decreases with each successful strike against a monster, depending on the weapon type. Heavy-hitting weapons like greatsword consume sharpness differently from faster weapons like dual blades. When the sharpness is decreased to red, our weapon attack will become dull and start to bounce off of the monster's body parts. This will leave us open and vulnerable to monster's attack, and should be avoided at all times. Certain weapon attacks also don't consume sharpness at all, such as shield bash from Sword and Shield. In Wilds, the shelling attacks from gun lance still consumes sharpness, but at an extremely low rate, so it's a decent buff on gun lance from previous titles. It's also worth noting that blocking with a greatsword and charge blade can also consume sharpness, unless we perform a perfect guard, which will negate any sharpness loss. Now with that out of the way, let's take a look at the skills that can directly influence or synergize with sharpness management and ultimately benefit our damage output. The first is handicraft. This skill simply adds to your weapon's maximum sharpness gauge and sometimes even allows access to higher sharpness tiers. Take the Guardian Fogger Sword and Shield as an example. This weapon comes with blue sharpness, but the sharpness indicator shows a portion of empty gauge with a small white underline. This means adding handicraft will help us fill that gauge and realize the white sharpness potential of this weapon. Handicraft won't increase the gauge past its maximum, so as good as this skill is, only slotting in enough amount and not overdoing it is recommended. The second is protective polish. This skill maintains our weapon's sharpness for a fixed period after sharpening, preventing sharpness loss. At level 3, we will gain a total 90 seconds of no sharpness loss at all. This is an ideal skill for fast attacking weapons like dual blades or sword and shield, and it's best used on weapons with very small amounts of white or purple sharpness. Speed sharpening will not directly increase our weapon sharpness. Instead, it can dramatically reduce sharpening animation time. At full level, it normally allows nearly instant sharpening using the regular whetstone. It works well in fast-paced hunts where speed matters and maintaining high sharpness is essential but challenging. But due to the existence of mount sharpening and special tools such as wetfish fin, this skill is a lackluster in modern Monster Hunter. Another great skill to preserve sharpness is Master's Touch. This skill simply prevents sharpness loss upon landing critical hits, rewarding high affinity builds. With this skill equipped, when landing a critical hit, which occurs when affinity check succeeds, there's an 80% probability that our weapon's sharpness remains unchanged. This skill combines excellently with skills like Weakness Exploit, Agitator, Maximum Might, and Critical Eye. And if our build can maintain high affinity for the majority of the hunt, this skill is arguably better than Handicraft and Protective Polish. That is, if you have to choose between them. And finally, Razor Sharp, or in the previous title being called Razor Sharp Spare Shot, is another skill that simply prevents weapons from losing sharpness. At level 3, it halves the possibility of sharpness consumption on weapon attacks. Similar to Protective Polish, it's very efficient for weapons with naturally small sharpness gauges. Now, with this said, the question becomes which is the best skill to use? Different weapons have varying sharpness strategies. There is no right answer here. Which skill to use completely depends on the build and up to personal preference. But here are some of my recommendations. For slow weapons such as Greatsword, Hammer, and Hunting Horn, due to fewer hits and high damage per hit, these weapons benefit greatly from maximizing sharpness tiers like White and Purple. Skills like Handicraft and Master's Touch are excellent here. For fast weapons such as Dual Blades, Sword and Shield, and Longsword, fast attacking weapons consume sharpness in smaller chunks but more frequently, making Razor Sharp and Protective Polish extremely beneficial. Master's Touch also synergizes well when paired with high affinity builds in such cases. Hybrid weapons such as Switch Axe, Charge Blade, and Lance, balancing between sharpness and attack speed, these benefit from skills like Handicraft combined with either Razor Sharp or Protective Polish. A Razor Sharp plus Handicraft jewel is possibly one of the best decorations you can get in the sharpness category. And before you go, here are some small fun facts and tips about weapon sharpness that apply to most of the Monster Hunter titles. Hitting hard monster parts that cause weapon bounces will significantly increase sharpness loss. Sharpness primarily affects raw and elemental damage. It doesn't affect status effects such as blast or paralysis. Status effects have separate calculations, which I also covered in a separate video linked down below. It's a good idea to always carry Wetfish Fins Plus in your item loadout for speed sharpness. They can be acquired by fishing and capturing wetfish from fishing points, and there is a good chance the item will not be consumed each time you use it, so it can go a long way once you have them. Finally, utilizing the radial menu for quick sharpening mid-combat is also recommended. And with that concludes my detailed guide on the sharpness and how to use it to our advantage. With this in mind, I think you will quickly see improvements in your hunt quality and efficiency. Be sure to share your sharpness management tips or builds below. Now I hope you find this video useful. If you did learn a thing or two, please leave a like and subscribe for more Monster Hunter content. Thanks for watching and see you next time.